Well, yesterday we discussed a bit in detail the ideal of the Aryan as it was used by Sri Krishna when he was talking to Arjuna. He mentioned that this is not the way of the Aryan. So we'll delve a little long on that concept of what is Aryan. And also we touched upon what Aurobindo sees as the Aryan invasion and the Dravidians and all this concept of the North and South people, that there are two different races in India. And as he says, there's no two races, only one race. And there was never an invasion of the Aryans into India. That's more a theory propounded by the Western philosophers or sociologists, more to psychologically dominate the Indians in order to propound that we are a superior race, we have come down from north and then we have civilized India and all that. And also you might remember that Sri Aurobindo's own works were written in the journal called the Arya. So that's pretty significant why he chose for writing all his major concepts of the life divine, synthesis of yoga and future poetry. All his entire massive work came out in the journal called the Arya. So obviously this concept, this ideal, this creed of the Arya has a great appeal. And I also noted while I was talking to you about the Arya, that you see when he wanted to awaken India, he chose the journal called Bande Mataram. But then when he wanted to communicate and awaken the whole world, I suppose, he chose the name the Arya. So obviously there is, you can see, a universal connotation. So he wants perhaps to show to the world that this Aryan ideology could also be taken into the future. Because as we have seen, the very name Arya tells us the question of the self-exceeding and one who ascends into the higher levels of consciousness. So that is essentially what Aurobindo is working for, raising of the human consciousness to higher levels. So with all this, you can see now the importance of the Arya, which has come to us right from the times of the Bhagavad Gita, and also Aurobindo has given it a new push into the future by choosing the name Arya for all his writings. Well, then we were actually in the third paragraph, and midway I took you to the concept of compassion. And we have seen the wonderful analysis drawn by Sri Aurobindo regarding the different levels of human sympathy and emotional sympathy. Then we have the compassion. Then we can go beyond compassion, where you are not even touched by sorrow and suffering. You see, compassion is where you have sympathy for those who are suffering. But then beyond compassion, there is a stage of the grace, where there is no possibility of suffering at all. So compassion comes after there is suffering. But grace comes and sees that you don't even have the suffering. So Aurobindo would say, grace is higher than compassion. Grace with one stroke takes away all the possibility of suffering. That's why we need to call to the divine grace and not to divine compassion. Because in compassion you have already accepted that there is suffering, you are the possibility of suffering and you are suffering. But if you call for the grace, there is all the possibility that even the suffering that you may have can be completely erased. Well, after seeing that analysis, I come back to the para and I'll give it a quick reading from the beginning and then we'll take up from midway. Whence has come to thee this dejection, this stain and darkness of the soul in the hour of difficulty and peril? Asked Krishna of Arjuna. The question points to the real nature of Arjuna's deviation from his heroic qualities. There is a divine compassion which descends to us from on high, and for the man whose nature does not possess it, is not cast in its mold, to pretend to be the superior man, the master man of the superman, is a folly and an insolence. For he alone is the superman who most manifests the highest nature of the Godhead in humanity. Now this is where we had stopped yesterday. To continue, this compassion observes with an eye of love and wisdom and calm strength the battle and the struggle, the strength and weakness of man, his virtues and sins, his joy and suffering, his knowledge and his ignorance, his wisdom and his folly, his aspiration and his failure, and it enters into it all to help and to heal. You see, that's what exactly I was telling. Compassion comes to heal the sorrow and the suffering and all that he has given, the battle and the struggle, the virtues and sins, the joy and suffering, knowledge and ignorance. So compassion is like a divine balm that really soothes your pain and your suffering. In the saint and philanthropist, it may cast itself into the mold of a plenitude of love or charity. In the thinker and hero, it assumes the largeness and the force of a helpful wisdom and strength. It is this compassion in the Aryan fighter, the soul of his chivalry, which will not break the bruised reed, but helps and protects the weak and the oppressed and the wounded and the fallen. But it is also the divine compassion that smites down the strong tyrant and the confident oppressor, not in wrath and with hatred, for these are not the high divine qualities. The wrath of God against the sinner, God's hatred of the wicked, are the fables of half-enlightened creeds, as much a fable as the eternal torture of the hells they have invented. But as the old Indian spirituality clearly saw, with as much love and compassion for the strong Titan, erring by his strength and slain for his sins, as for the sufferer and the oppressed, who have to be saved from his violence and injustice. Well, this is, that's the deeper aspect of this concept of compassion. And especially we see, of course, he has given those who have understood that the saint and the philanthropist, the way they showed that compassion is through love and charity, the thinker through wisdom and strength, etc. But what's interesting is, it is also the divine compassion that smites down the strong tyrant and the confident oppressor, not in wrath and with hatred. That is the difference. That is what most people of other religions do not conceive. That they cannot conceive that the divine is the same person who can kill, who can destroy. Because for the other religions, divine is always one who does good to humanity. There's all the good things clubbed as the divine or God, and all the bad things as Satan. So they have divided this action, the dynamic action in the world, into good and bad. And they cannot imagine that this killing or this violence or the destruction is also one part, one aspect, one poise of the divine. That's why we have seen in this book, the Mother, the Mahakali aspect. And also why in the book, the Mother, in the Bhagavad Gita itself, we have seen the great Lord as a destroyer, time the destroyer. And then he says, I am the same destroyer as I am the keeper of the world, I am upholder of the world. So in Hindu philosophy, we have seen these different aspects of the divine, as the destroyer, as the savior. But the only thing is when we say, we have this concept of the dance of Shiva, the destructive dance of Shiva. So there also you have seen, these are lines that occur in Savitri also, where we see there is the dance of destruction. And you have seen the famous statue of Nataraja, the dancing Nataraja. I mean, if you have not read, you should read Ananda Kumara Swami's description of this Nataraja. And I don't know which book it was, the famous book on Indian culture. Well, his description of Nataraja is one of the most supremely beautiful expressions or explanations. And of course, we see that. What Aurobindo is telling us here, that that the divine can kill the oppressor, but not in wrath. You see that magnificent statue of Nataraja. You see, there's destruction all around, but look at his face. There's no wrath, no anger, absolute peace, and even ecstatic Ananda. So he is not doing this destruction, he or in the name of Mahakali, and whose description we get in the book The Mother. There's never any wrath. That we, the human beings, we destroy out of wrath, anger, whatever the reasons may be. But here the divine, the question of the wrath of God does not come in. And he clearly mentioned that this concept of the wrath of God against the sinner, God's hatred of the wicked, are fables of half-enlightened creeds. When religion had started, human beings had to invent this kind of a wrath of God. God gets angry. The other day, the last time when we were in Siliguri somewhere, Assam, and it happened to be the day of Kali Puja. And Bengal still follows the practice of Bali, sacrificing a goat. And it just happened that we came out of our guest house, and so the thing is, we came out for a breakfast, and a Bengali gentleman, at a small restaurant, and he was serving the breakfast. And outside his hut or the little restaurant, we saw a little lamb lather, just a tiny little thing tied to a post. We said, what is that for? He said, no, Dada, don't you know today's Kali Puja? So what? That's what is going to go for the Bali, the sacrifice. We said, look, you seem to be quite an educated man. He was speaking fluent English, and he said, I've read this, I've read that. I said, do you really believe, and can you really see this little lamb being really chopped off his head? He says, yes, Dada, we have to do that, otherwise Kali would be angry. Kali would be angry if I don't give the Bali, the wrath of God against the sinner. So you see, these are, in the name of Kali, in the name of God, that if you don't do this, you are a sinner and you will be punished by God, God's hatred of the wicked. All these they speak of religions which are, as Aurobindo, very, I would say, compassionately calls them half-enlightened creeds, but the real calling a spade is they're really undeveloped creeds. Those which are there in the primitive stage, religion when it's in the primitive stage speaks of this wrath of God and then the hatred of the wicked and all that. But as religion grows, or religions grow, become more mature, then this aspect of this question of the wrath of God or the hatred of the wicked is taken away. And that's one of the things you will see in Mother and Aurobindo. There's only love of the divine. There's no fear of the divine. And still, I've seen amongst those who believe in Aurobindo and the Mother also, they still have this old streak comes in. Mother will not be happy. Mother will be angry. Mother may not like this. This is again the old streaks of the old religion. If I do this, yesterday I was talking to a foreigner, and they still have this old concept of Christianity, which they superimpose on the Mother and Aurobindo. I mean, the Christian fear of God is so very strong. The question of what Aurobindo calls even the torture of the hell, etc., that even when they come to Mother and Aurobindo, it is difficult for them to come out of this. You see, they still think, there are the 10 commandments written by the Mother and this Aurobindo, it's somewhere in the book, and these thou shalt not do, and if you do that, they say, how can it be that we do that, and shouldn't we be afraid of this thing, we'll be sinners and all that. So it's a very difficult thing for human mind to get rid of this old fear of God. But that is what counts if you really are in the old religion or with the spirituality. One of the major things, as we have said before, that the fear of God is the major difference between religion and spirituality. When you come to spirituality, it's the love of the divine. Religion is the fear of God. So you can think more about that from that line. So Aurobindo is here very clear that all this question of eternal hell and sinner and the punishments and all that is primitive religion. And then he says, as the old Indian spirituality clearly saw, with as much love and compassion for the strong Titan erring by his strength and slain for his sins, so the divine would kill the Titan for his erring by his strength with the same love and save the oppressed who have to be saved. I don't know, I don't remember exactly the exact words, but I should not be misquoted, but the sense of it was that once on some occasions some people saw Aurobindo, a few drops of tears rolling down his cheeks. Was it for Sarojini? He went to leave Sarojini at the station. Sarojini is his sister. Because to leave her, he had been to Pondicherry station. So that's why the station is a holy place as such for us. And maybe while he was coming back, he shed some tears and somebody saw that and he said, I don't know what he was called at that time, A.G. or Aurobindo or whatever it was, or Gurudev or plenty of things. That you are having tears for Sarojini? Some such thing. It's not a quotation. But the whole thing is, he said, yeah, but I am the same man who can take a dagger and also kill. So it's not that tears are the weakness or the sense of, one who is beyond. For him there could be the same killing, would be the same, out of the same compassion and love as is being shown by his tears for somebody. So this is the compassion out of which the Kali kills, or Shiva, Nataraja and Shiva kills, or anything happens. So he says it's the Indian religion, the Indian spirituality which caught this essential truth, that God is both the destroyer and the creator. We have the same great Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. So we have the same, all the three together. Coming to the next para. But such is not the compassion which actuates Arjuna in the rejection of his work and mission. That is not compassion, but an impotence full of a weak self-pity, a recoil from the mental suffering which his act must entail on himself. I see not what shall thrust from me the sorrow that dries up the senses. And of all things, self-pity is among the most ignoble and un-Aryan of moods. So yesterday we said that it is good to have pity, but not self-pity. Self-pity is what? Is again based on one's own ego. That you are crying for yourself. But that you sort of, you cover it, as I think Aurobindo has used the word, with a kind of a rational explanation. So Arjuna's is basically a self-pity, is not any question of compassion showing to others or elders or gurus or pitrus. And that's where Sri Krishna catches. He says it's a self-pity and most unbefitting of an Aryan. Its pity for others is also a form of self-indulgence. It is a physical shrinking of the nerves from the act of slaughter, the egoistic emotional shrinking of the heart from the destruction of the Dhritarashtrians, because they are one's own people, and without them life will be empty. This pity is a weakness of the mind and senses, a weakness which may well be beneficial to men of a lower grade of development, who have to be weak because otherwise they will be hard and cruel. For they have to cure the harsher by the gentler forms of sensational egoism. They have to call in tamas, the divine principle, to help sattva, the principle of light, in quelling the strength and excess of their rajasic passions. This is a very interesting analysis if you have noted. Well, one of course is Arjuna's, we understand as a weakness of the mind and the senses, etc. A weakness which may be beneficial to men of a lower grade of development. You see, the ordinary people, people like us, we are well off with this pity. In fact, it says it's beneficial to men of the lower grade because to be weak, because otherwise they'll be hard and cruel. There's a very interesting psychological turn here. That he says, on one side we have the sattva, sattvic guna, we want to help, we want to really show that we are really concerned with you, with your suffering, etc. And the other side we have the tamas, which doesn't react, it says let them go to hell if they are suffering, so what does it matter? So between these two, let them go to hell of the tamas and wanting to help of the sattva, he said this rajasic guna, which is pity and compassion, wanting to help, balances. If you don't have pity in the human heart, then you can be maybe, floundering in tamas. But because this pity is there, that you come out to help others. Well, it is a grade, as we have seen in yesterday's analysis, what I read out from Aurobindo, that it is helpful, although it may be something selfish, even self-centered in the sense, it's egoistic. But still it is one action which pulls you out of tamas, takes you towards the others. We may call it altruism, which Aurobindo does not approve of, but still a step better than being in the tamas. At least you say, he is suffering, let me help. But if you are indifferent to the human suffering and the animal suffering and the tree suffering, then you are a dead person. So it's better than being in the tamas, indifferent and dead. It's better to have pity, which will at least activate your emotion. And then there's chance that you can go beyond. So that's where he says that otherwise you will be hard and cruel. For they have to cure the harsher by the gentler forms. But this way is not for the developed Aryan man, who has to grow not by weakness but by an ascension from strength to strength. Arjuna is the divine man, the master man in the making, and as such he has been chosen by the gods. He has a work given to him. He has God beside him in his chariot. He has the heavenly bow Gandiva in his hand. He has the champions of unrighteousness, the opponents of the divine, leading of the world in his front. So this is, you can see the character of Arjuna very beautifully given there. The most important, I suppose, is the first one. He has a work given to him. So this is the mission. You see, in this entire Pandavas and Kauravas, nobody is given the mission. That's why the importance of Arjuna. The great Dharmaraj, Yudhishthir, is not given the mission. Although he is the best of the human beings, most sattvic, most ethical, perfect man who never tells a lie and all that. Still he is not a man of mission. And that is the great importance of Arjuna, who has all the defects of a human being, so-called his vital life, so-called his mental ideals, and you have seen his self-pity, and then how he, even as a Kshatriya, he buckles in. But still, somewhere he is chosen, he has a mission, and then he has God beside him in his chariot. And that, I suppose, is a lovely message to all of us. That we also in our own work have the Mother and Aurobindo beside us. That is the trust and the faith with which we need to go ahead in our work and life. It's a very important phrase. He has God beside him in his chariot. Well, there it was a literal truth that he was the charioteer. Shri Krishna was the charioteer. But what was the inner significance of being a charioteer? That means is the divine within who controls you, who directs you. So the charioteer is sitting within us. That is the soul or the Atman or the psychic being. So within all of us, the same Shri Krishna is there. And the same Mother and Aurobindo are there. So in fact, there's a writing, with the mother beside you, what need you to be afraid of, or something. What should you be afraid of? Yeah, something like that. With the mother beside you, what should you be afraid of? That is the same concept here. That he has God beside him, he has the heavenly bow Gandiva in his hand. Now, heavenly bow Gandiva is also an instrumentation. Well, there it is a weapon given by the divine, by gods, Indra. But again, you see, psychologically see it into ourselves. That we ourselves can develop our own weapons. Weapon means not necessarily a bow and arrow and a sword or a gun. It is an instrument which can manifest you. So if I develop a beautiful mind, if you develop a great sense of aesthetics, if you develop a lovely body, then all this can be your weapons or instruments of self-expression. So he says all this, he has the champions of unrighteousness, the opponents of the divine leading of the world in his front. Not his is the right to determine what he shall do or not do according to his emotions and his passions, or to shrink from a necessary destruction by the claim of his egoistic heart and reason, or to decline his work because it will bring sorrow and emptiness to his life, or because its earthly result has no value to him in the absence of the thousands who must perish. See, this important word is this one. Not his is the right to determine what he shall do or not do according to his emotions and his passions. That is the real Aryan fighter. And not only the Aryan fighter, one who is being chosen by the divine as an instrument, he has no right to decide for himself anymore. As we have seen the other day in the synthesis of yoga, I think the line was there, that this surrender is so stupendous that they lose their personality. This is exactly what happened with Arjuna. He had surrendered himself to Lord Krishna, and that was his greatest strength. Rest of it was not great strength. But in his surrender, he says, now I have taken you over. You have no personal choice. You cannot cry for your family or what will happen to your country and all that. He says, it's me. I'm going to decide for you. So this is also, in our own personal yoga, I've seen this becomes really a reality of day-to-day living. The more you surrender, you will see your capacity for decision becomes less and less. Because after a point, you come to a stage, you really don't know what to do. It's not the incapacity to think and be clear, but somewhere you feel, I'm not the person to decide. There's a feeling, then they say, no, Ma, you decide for me. I can decide, but still I withhold from a decision and say, Ma, can you not intervene and say what's to be done? So this feeling does come, and I've seen it happening many a time. So this is the psychological approach to what Aurobindo is describing about the Gita. And then he says, all that is a weak falling from his higher nature, he has to see only the work that must be done, kartavyam karma, to hear only the divine command breathed through his warrior nature, to feel only for the world and the destiny of mankind calling to him as this God-sent man to assist its march and clear its path of the dark armies that beset it. That's the command. That's the work in front of him. He shan't think of any consequences. He's there to do the command. And that word kartavyam karma is, of course, as most of you who have read the Gita would know, is one of the most important concepts. But it is not so easy to follow this kartavyam karma. Means you have to do the work that needs to be done or that must be done. That is the meaning of kartavyam karma. This is where entire question of morality, faith, trust comes in. You see, the work we ought to do, I know. The work which must be done, I know. But the question is, when I go to do it, then I'm not able to do it. Why? There's so many factors that come in. My personal profit, my family's benefit, or some other people may suffer out of this. You see, so the mind and the emotion, they play so much upon your sense of kartavyam karma. You see, as an ideal, but can we really do out of our weakness, out of our considerations? You see, again, I'm trying to relate it to really the practical realities. Again, the question of my discussion with this foreign person. You see, they think, or she thinks, or they think, doesn't matter, that an ashramite means one who follows Mother and Aurobindo, the Mother, Life Divine Synthesis of Yoga. But then when we talk about the problems of the ashrams, about ashramites, about the sadhaks, they're surprised. They're even shocked. So how can the ashramites be like that? They ought not to be this. They ought to be this because they are the sadhaks. So everywhere what happens, we think that because you are taken into an ashramiteship that you are already that. But that is not the reality. There's again a kind of a Christian monastic idea. But here in Aurobindo's yoga, be it in ashram or be it in Aurobindo, it's all different. We all know what ought to be done, what is to be done, what must be done. But there's so much of the other elements of our nature that come forth that oftentimes we fail. But a failure is not considered again, as Aurobindo said before, as a sin. But for the Christian mentality, it would be a sin that if I've not done that, then I've committed a sin. Then it becomes a morality. Sin is the concept of morality, it has nothing to do with spirituality. So you see, there's a great battle in them, and we have to really talk to this person at great length to say, no, this is pure religion and morality. But in spirituality, we know the ideal. We know that I have to reach my psychic being at the first length. But it doesn't mean I have to sacrifice making the garden, I have to sacrifice making the sakar. I can't do that. I have to do this parallelly. And while I am working for sakar, maybe I get angry with somebody, maybe I don't like somebody. So these things also come up. So the word kartavyam karma is on this level difficult. But then for an advanced sadhak, it becomes something normal. And there also I have seen cases, like we had a very good example in Dhiman Bhai. Some of you know him here. We had Amritada, a fabulous example. Amrita, of course, only maybe I think Ranjan Bhan would know, if anyone else would know, I don't know. Was again such a sweet person. Where we had the meditation hall now in the ashram, he used to live just beside that. Now we saw, we talked to him many times, but he will do exactly what needs to be done. And he knew what needs to be done because everything he would ask the mother. You want a servant at home? Wait, I'll ask the mother and come. You want an extra bucket at home? Okay, I'll ask the mother and come. So for him, he didn't have any kind of, as he says, personal determination, personal choice or selection of what to do. He followed the mother's instructions so verbatim that for him there's no conflict. So small to big, yoga to material things, objects, everything he would say, I'll ask the mother. And that is also was wonderful because Amrita never came in between me and the mother. He never gave his decision. He said, no, wait. And he could just run up the stairs and ask the mother, one flight of steps and they were there. So we could see the transparency, this Amrita, really the purity of the being. He was absent. But all the time he would say, I will do what I'm supposed to do. I will do what I need to do. I will do what the mother has told me to do. Beyond that, he will not take a step. He says no. And so was Dhiman Bhai. Till the last day of his passing away, he did what he had to do. And there he faced a lot of criticism from the ashramites, I must tell you that. But he said, no, this is what I feel I must do for the ashram, for the mother, and Mother has given me the responsibility, so I shall go ahead. And in spite of so many resistances, he did what he thought is the right thing for the ashram. So it requires a great courage, no compromise with anything, with anybody, no family, no friends, nothing. But those, I said, are really the great beings. Not all of us can do that. So that's why I said the word kartavyam karma is one of the most important concepts of the Gita, because that really highlights in a single phrase almost the entire philosophy of action of the Gita. What is the entire philosophy of action of the Gita? That you just act without thinking of the benefit, or as it says, the fruit of action. Kartavyam karma is exactly that. You never think for the fruit of your action, for the result of your action, for the consequence of your action. But who can do this kartavyam karma? Again, one who is really guided from within. You must have a kind of an intuitive touch or a psychic call. Then only you'll have the strength to do it. Otherwise, mentally, if I say, no, Sakar, I'm supposed to come at 9 o'clock, but but Ananda may be angry with me if I don't come at 9 o'clock. That doesn't work. Because Ananda himself may not come for a week, he is going abroad. So you may bunk him at that time. But if it is there within, no, this is for the mother. And I insisted on this a little more, because I follow it myself as much as possible. Because once long back, Monada had read out something, a conversation with the mother, in which the mother said, at 7:15, even when she was not coming to the playground, I wait for all of you at the march past. March past is this India's symbol in the playground. And she said, whenever you give me time, say today there's a function at 7 o'clock. She says, I am there, waiting for you. So then it really hit me hard that once we say, Ma, 9 o'clock there's a meditation, then she waits for you. So that you come, she fills up your being. So since that time Monada read out, it has gone deep into me that whatever we say, we have to keep with the timing, because she comes at that time proper. So that's what I tell my people here and everywhere, that don't do things for me or for Anand Bhai or for Anand Reddy or Dr. Reddy. No. It must be a call from within, that you and the mother. So this kartavyam karma is based on an inner call or an intuition. Then only things will have the strength to last. If you do it for any external person, it becomes duty. Kartavyam karma is not duty, please remember. It is an inner dharma. Duty for the sake of duty has no value. As I said, you can always cheat your boss. But kartavyam karma you cannot cheat, because the boss is the divine. So that's why I said this concept is extremely deep. And if one can practice that, it's superb. Coming to the next para. Arjuna, his reply to Krishna, admits the rebuke, even while he strives against and refuses the command. He is aware of his weakness and yet accepts subjection to it. It is poorness of spirit. He owns that has smitten away from him his true heroic nature. His whole consciousness is bewildered in its view of right and wrong, and he accepts the divine friend as his teacher. But the emotional and intellectual props on which he had supported his sense of righteousness have been entirely cast down, and he cannot accept a command which seems to appeal only to his old standpoint and gives him no new basis for action. You see, this is I'm trying to relate this to our own existence, our own problems and our own contemporary times. You see, this is very important that he knows his weakness and yet accepts subjection to it. He says it's the poorness of spirit he owns. And then he says his whole consciousness is bewildered in view of right and wrong and accepts the divine as teacher. But the emotional and intellectual props on which he has supported his sense of righteousness have been entirely cast down. And he cannot accept a command which seems to appeal only to his old standards. You see, this is so very true, because even in the ashram, we have all accepted the mother as the divine, on the working level, as the master, as the teacher, as the mother, as the guru, whatever you want to call. But how many of us are able to follow the teacher? This is a very beautiful psychological analysis of each one of us. And yet we must understand this is spirituality, this is not religion. That we know our faults, we know our problems, we have accepted the divine friend, because Mother and Aurobindo are as much divine friends as they are divine beings. And yet, this one, that the props of the emotional and intellectual they do not accept the divine command because they appeal only to his old standpoint and gives him no new basis for action. So what I'm trying to tell you is that although the divine may tell you certain things, and which has happened, even in my own life case, Mother has told me, written to me in the letter, this is to be done. But I did not do it. It was a command. And yet the vital, the intellect, as Aurobindo puts it here, they think that they go to the old standpoint. You see, this is a very, very real thing. What Arjuna is doing is not then 2000 years back. Even now, it's the same thing. We know the mother. She wrote to me not to do this or to do this. And in fact, I had the vital audacity to write back to her saying, Mother, I don't understand what you're writing. It's purely a vital rejection of the mother's own command. Because the vital cannot accept something new, so drastic, beyond its own standpoint. So you see, this yoga is not so easy that we can really do everything that they want. Because there are different elements in our mind, in our being. My mind may be convinced, but my vital may not be convinced. So this is exactly the problem, that because I understand this because it has happened with me. So what Arjun is passing through in a very infinitesimal way, I too know that. That we have accepted the divine as a teacher, but our mind and the vital, they go to the old concepts. And why even, just the other day I was discussing, there are some Bengalis here in the ashram who still have Saraswati Puja, who still have Lakshmi Puja, who have this at home, they have special dresses, they have special foods and special. I said, why? We have the darshans. Isn't that sufficient? But no. They have to go back into their old formations, old standpoint. So you see, this is a very complex thing. So do not judge the ashramites or the Aurobindo saying, oh, they are not doing the mother's yoga. I would say, okay, you come and do if you want to try it out. Let me see after 20 years what happens if you don't sing the same song that I am singing so loud today. So it's easy to say, but this is where the transformation is. The old pulls you back, the new pulls you forward. There's a tussle between the old ideology and the new ideology. So it's a big struggle. We may not really voice it all the time that I'm really a great Aryan fighter. But in the small things, we are small beings. But the struggle is the same, like Arjuna. He was a chosen man, fine. We are also chosen in our own way. Because if you have come to the mother and Aurobindo, it is a chosen thing. Because we are also being experimented upon. So in a way, what Arjuna is saying is the truth of today also. But had it been a religion, as like Lord Krishna's or Aurobindo's, this problem would not have been there. Because in religion, thou shalt do, this 10 commandments you shall do. Otherwise you are a sinner, you go to hell, etc. etc. But Krishna and Aurobindo are not religions. So the struggle between the old and the new, all these things continue. He says, he attempts still to justify his refusal of the work and puts forward in its support the claim of his nervous and sensational being, which shrinks from the slaughter with its sequel of blood-stained enjoyments. The claim of his heart, which recoils from the sorrow and emptiness of life that will follow his act. The claim of his customary moral notions, which are appalled by the necessity of slaying his gurus, Bhishma and Drona. The claim of his reason, which sees no good but only evil results of the terrible and violent work assigned to him. He is resolved that on the old basis of thought and motive, he will not fight. And he awaits in silence the answer to objections that seem to him unanswerable. It is these claims of Arjuna's egoistic being that Krishna sets out first to destroy in order to make place for the higher law, which shall transcend all egoistic motives of action. You see, this way our Gita becomes so extraordinary, so contemporary. I mean, I for one find it so much contemporary with my life today and yesterday and day before. And on the rational level, Aurobindo has given you a beautiful analysis. Nervous level, emotional level, moral level, intellectual level. On all the levels, Arjuna has questions. And apparently, all his objections are unanswerable. You cannot argue with Arjuna on the same level. He will win because he is perfectly logical, perfectly moral, perfectly emotional, and on the physical level also. So Sri Krishna does not answer him on the mental, on the vital, on the physical, on the moral level. Because on these levels, Arjuna is unanswerable. So you have seen the Gita, Sri Krishna never touches these points on that level. So what Sri Krishna does is takes a higher law and then for establishing the higher law, he demolishes the lower law. That's the important word here. He says, he sets out first to destroy in order to make place for the higher law. And you have seen some such thing happening in Savitri also. Death is constantly arguing with Savitri on perfect mental, intellectual, moral, historical levels which cannot be answered, which cannot be refuted. And there exactly the same thing. Savitri never answers death one-to-one. She always takes a higher stand. She always takes a higher stand. Because the truth of the lower level is a perfect truth. What morality says, what emotions have said, how can I see my Drona and Bhishma bleeding in blood in front of me? That's the reality of my emotions. Once I have considered them as my gurus, my heart cannot be that cruel to see my own guru bleeding in blood and I don't do anything. So you cannot really answer these questions. So Savitri also does not answer. She always takes a higher law. So this is what we have to realize, that there is a truth on every level. But there are different levels of truths. That's the only difference we have to see. Otherwise, a rationalist is perfectly true in his rational arguments. And if you want to argue with him, it is endless. There can be 100 people and there are 200 views. Because reason is that. But then there's a higher law. There's a greater law. So when we want to be spiritual, we want to go to the higher laws. So that is the only way we can challenge the lower law and not from the same level. So this is the modus operandi in the Gita and the same in Savitri. Because in spirituality there is no intellectual argument. Please remember. I remember this message long back in 71 or 72. No, not in 71. Well, I forget. Maybe in 76. Once Niruddha had told me this and it really has stuck onto my mind. He said, Anand, never argue out your point. You will never win. So since then I never argue with those people who have a point of argument with Mother or Aurobindo or yoga or my nature. Or I said, fine. If that's what you think, go ahead. Because the moment you start arguing, it's clashes of ego. So he said, because I was going out to Hyderabad, so he cautioned me saying, take care, don't argue with people. So there may be, a professor who tells against Aurobindo or against me, and that has happened when I was doing my MPhil, people were against me, against Aurobindo. I just kept cool. Because, intellectual level is a very difficult level to argue. So you have to go to the superior level. And from that superior level, you will convince him better than the logical level. Because the higher law brings a greater light, a deeper understanding, and the same intellectual man tomorrow will say, yeah, I think now I understand what Reddy is saying. But if I had argued him at that time, it would have been pure ego clashes. Then this is the way. So what Aurobindo is telling us is that Arjuna is resolved that on the old basis of thought and motive he will not fight, and he awaits in silence the answer to objections that seem to him unanswerable. So essentially what Sri Krishna does is to give Arjuna a higher law of action. Please remember this. It is not a higher philosophy. We may think he is really discussing Sankhya and Yoga and Patanjali and all that, but it is not a higher philosophy. Sri Krishna is not a philosopher. Aurobindo is one, but Sri Krishna is not one. He was a warrior right on the Kurukshetra war. So there he did not give out philosophy. In war you don't speak of philosophy, you speak of action and strategies of action. And so what Lord Krishna gives you is a new law of action. Well, we will have a little break at this point and we'll come back.